The situation in Pokrovsk remains tough, but Ukraine seems to be trying to take advantage of the chaos as Russia goes all in on taking whatever remains of the city. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so the latest updates is that, fighting in Pokrovsk is extremely heavy by almost every account. And we can see that Russian forces have continued to progress, at least marginally, into Pokrovsk. But crucially, they aren't necessarily closing the pincer. You can see that this progress has been pushing into this Moskovska, as well as kind of north in this little corner of Pokrovsk. But what's the most important thing is maintaining a level, the ability to evacuate from Pokrovsk. And you can see that some forces, reportedly some Ukrainian forces, remain as far south as Suky Yar. And this is a pretty big problem for the Ukrainians because, again, we're talking about nearly 10 kilometers, right? 6 miles from the mouth, so to speak, of this pincer. And that's a long way to go, especially on foot, as many Ukrainian forces may find themselves. So the whole, and what we've talked about is the fact that basically throughout this whole area, it is a close quarters battle. So if you are a Ukrainian trooper in Suky Yar, you're not withdrawing through Ukrainian lines. You're withdrawing through basically street battle after street battle. FPV drones, Russian forces, Ukrainian forces, small 2-3 man teams operating in positions trying to get out of here. And the dangers, of course, is of Russian encirclement of these forces. And the Ukrainians essentially seem to be focused. Their strategy remains pushing the Russians out from this pincer here, the northernmost pincer near Mirnohad, to create a sort of ability to go due north and then out through this channel here. But it's really hard to do because, remember, we're talking about a 7-kilometer range here. 3 kilometers in this gray area, but even more, we're looking at up to 9 or 10 kilometers from the apex of Russian advances all the way to sort of the end of this pincer. So if the Ukrainians getting through this pincer is actually probably pretty tough. But if they can do it, right, from what I've heard, the 10 kilometers closest to Russian positions are where the drone threat is densest. You can see that, again, looking at the live UA map, the situation looks a little different, right? Reportedly 9 hours ago, you've got some Ukrainian forces, special operations forces, really operating in and around Pokrovsk, trying to, again, build out a little more room for people to escape. You can see here, this is just a better video, but there's still this critical problem of evacuating through this T515 highway where you have to come just too close to Russian forces for this to be effective. You probably could get, if you can get to Ravina and turning up and down and around, but remember, Russian forces have the same maps. They are going to be able to observe this action here and here. It's very tough, especially, again, if you are Ukrainian forces in this Suky Yar region. It's a really hard place to be, right? They're so far removed, and you can see that the roads are so limited, right? Trails, it's just going to be really hard, and you have to do this retreat in just a small arms range of Russian forces. And drone range, the whole pocket is drone range. The hope is that Ukrainian forces, again, if they're smart, they're not going to try to win. They're going to try to buy time to complete a withdrawal to preserve their manpower, because that's the one thing that Ukraine has a real disadvantage in, is manpower. We've heard even statements from Robert Magyar, the commander of Magyar's Birds, who has said, listen, we have the drones, but we need the pilots. He said there are drones awaiting pilots today. And so, the preserving the lives of Ukrainian troops is a total priority here. And that's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are deploying as many reinforcements as they are, because they believe that reinforcing this pocket will allow majorities of the Ukrainian forces to retreat. Again, why it was allowed to get this close before major interventions were taken is difficult to understand. And you can see, though, the Russians are really going all in here, because in Pokrovsk, 30% of all Russian combat operations are taking place in Pokrovsk, right? That means that for every one soldier in for every one firefight in Pokrovsk, there are only 2 other firefights throughout the entire front line, right? Literally, from Kharkiv to Zaporizhzhia, thousands of kilometers. And it's 30% of that is concentrated in this tiny 10-kilometer pocket. Now, the Ukrainians are taking advantage of this overwhelming concentration of Russian firepower because they're reportedly clearing the city of Kupiansk, which, again, is an action that in part is meant to force Russia to divert its troops. We know, for example, that the Russian high command very publicly briefed Putin that Kupiansk was surrounded. It was about to be cleared. It was about to be annexed. So forcing the Russians to say, okay, if you want to make sure what you briefed Putin is true, you're going to have to divert combat troops away from Pokrovsk to Kupiansk. It is the strategy that we've seen the Ukrainians implement before. But in previous fighting, we've seen that Ukraine doesn't always, I think, choose that attritional math well, right? A small number of troops conducting a decisive, hard clearing operation against 60 Russian troops, and that forces the redeployment of 1,000 Russian troops, probably worth it. If it requires 1,000 Ukrainian troops, it's probably not worth it. So again, this is really difficult situations. You can see even Ukrainian, the HUR has released some of the combat footage from within Pokrovsk. Right, you can see them conducting operations, clearing out the rubble of this destroyed warehouse, trying to just get the Russians out of here. From both drone and on the ground footage, you see tanks, infantry, even helicopters. The fact that helicopters are deployed, these are very expensive assets to operate at baseline, and these are very, very high risk. So they enable mobility, but they can literally be on the battlefield for such a short period of time. And the risk of a $500 drone taking out your $3 million Black Hawk is so great that the Ukrainians are very reluctant to use it. So, again, people talk about even this write-up says the battle to save the city from encroaching Russian forces. That is hopefully not what the fighting is. Hopefully this is about saving the forces inside the city from Russian forces and conducting a good, systematic, meaningful retreat. Again, HUR saying that the battles are fierce. It's just tough, man. This is like, there's no like good spin on this. Because again, it's about mitigating the downsides, right? And you can see that again, different maps are showing different things, different levels of advance, but these Ukrainian forces in this pocket, they're going to have a really hard time getting out. They have to find a way out. They have to find, and again, you can see some of these infiltration, there's infiltration happening across the front line. It's hard, and the Ukrainians should not have let it get to this point. And the fact that they're deploying so many resources to mitigate this is, I think, a sign of just how bad the situation is, right? This isn't an orderly retreat. And again, I want to see this situation mitigated. But man, this would have been a lot easier to order the retreat 3-4 weeks ago. Anyway, guys, thanks to Alfred Chesky Allen, that's in Christine Schumann, Dan M, Deborah Oppenheimer, all of our Lieutenant tier members. You can now become a member of Combat Vet News through YouTube. Just become a member. You'll see. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.